Teachers have read it. What was your how are my students is dumb moment? College instructor, you would be shocked. Just last year, multiple students can't save Word docs as PDFs. Students take smartphone pictures of every single slide while I lecture even though I upload them to our LMS. Personal favorite, when asked to insert a picture into a Word document, one student prints the Word doc, prints the picture, puts the picture on the Word doc, takes a smartphone picture and uploads the file. Miss my millennial students. Don't know if this counts, but I was a TA for a semester in grad school. Never again. One student submitted this paper I will never forget. Basically, the author was wrong because the student found the argument boring. In explaining the author's argument, he got most points wrong and then proceeded to say he had a better argument. His argument was the author's argument. I asked my students to write a sentence and give an example. One of the students, age 12/13, asked what's an example? Actually really hard to explain. Are mermaids real? Followed shortly by I don't believe in dinosaurs. She was 16. I teach swimming lessons and lifeguarding courses. During one, I was trying to teach them CPR and instead of showing them first, I told them to show me what they already knew about it. They then proceeded to observe 15, 16-20-year-olds do the weirdest shit to those poor training dolls. My favorite though was the kid who did a 2-foot jump onto the chest of the dummy. The dummy slid out from under his feet like a cartoon banana and he landed on his rear end on the pool deck. Good times. I have a poster on my wall that says something about not believing everything you read on the internet, and it attributes the quote to Abraham Lincoln. Student said, wait, did they have internet back then? One of my 16-year-old students asked, while starting a multiple choice test, if it mattered what letter he chose. I just stared at him. Sometimes there are no words. I asked my class of 5th graders what city they live in, and the first response was Texas. During a spelling test last year, I said a word 3 times and a student asked, Miss, how do you spell that? Me, I'm thinking of a fruit that is yellow and very sour. Student, chickenpox. 3 weeks into writing a research paper. Okay, today we'll continue writing the body paragraphs of the essay. Student, what essay? A classmate of mine in elementary school had this exchange with our teacher. What's the answer to this multiple choice question with 3 choices? A. No. C. No. I don't know. For the uninitiated, I give you Kevin. George Clooney was the first president, right? 10th grader. Coach, I was a baseball coach as well for a high school. Our bio teacher was talking about menstrual cycles. What is that? 9th grade female. Coach, I walked into the weirdest women's restroom. There were toilets with no stalls. I couldn't figure out how to pee in them. You walked into the men's bathroom. Those were urinals you saw. How to men pee in them? Same 9th grade female. What is Vladimir Lenin's first name? 8th grader. I replied Joseph. Does a male octopus have 8 testicles? 9th grade boy. In history class. I wouldn't call him dumb but I did stop and stare at him thinking it was a joke. When I was student teaching last year, one of my students made a comment about the 52 states. I corrected him and said there are 50 states and he asked me if I remembered to count both Washingtons, as in Washington and Washington, D.C. Not a teacher, but one freshman in my class took a rip of his vape and got caught by the substitute teacher. He tried to deny it by saying he could make vapor out of his mouth with nothing else. One of my 6th graders had a brain fart moment. Couldn't remember the word for his suspenders. Called them farmer straps, complete with hooking his thumbs through his imaginary suspenders and moving his hands up and down, like an old guy wearing suspenders might do. And I laughed so hard I cried and almost fell out of my damn chair. Edit. Hot damn. Thanks for popping my gold cherry. I teach on the college level and students try to convince me dumb stuff is true a lot. At least once a semester a student will try to fight with me saying Africa's a country. Not a teacher, but was helping my friend who's a TA go over some first year essays. It was an essay about video games, and aside from the format being non-existent, One of the first sentences was something along the lines of there are many examples of video games, such as the Wii and PS4 and Zelda. Unfortunately, she wasn't allowed to grade any papers below 50%. He got a 50%. I'm not a teacher, but I work in a school. Every semester at least one class comes into my computer lab to take a test on the computer. The teacher reminds them all that no sites other than the test page are allowed. There's always one kid who pulls up Google the first time he doesn't know an answer. It's like clockwork. Edit. Forgot to add we have software to see computer screens and the students are told this. Last year I was a TA for gender studies at a reasonably well-ranked university in the US. I asked students to write a short story about how life for humans would be if we reproduced in a different way and how it would affect society. For example, we grow our babies in jars in the hospital. How would that affect society? I told them not to write anything they wouldn't want their old lady teaching team to read. I got 4 pages of explicit spider pornography. None of my students have ever been dumb, but they had brain farts at times. I was teaching in the East End of London in a school that was 98% Bengali. I had one lesson about our names and that they have meanings to our families, culture, or in other languages etc. I shared why my name was what it was and the meaning behind it. Some children were sharing about their names. One of my students got very excited and yelled out, "What does my name mean?" The whole class did a face palm. His name was Mohammed. I'm not a teacher, but when school started back up I was put in German 2 and the most students didn't study over summer, so the teacher came in and said, "Hello class. We war der summer." "Hello class. How was summer?" And no one knew how to respond. She then took a student's items and threw it. She left the room saying "Dummkopf, dumbhead." She never returned and has been replaced by a sub. I'm not a teacher, but in my IB Math Studies course, we spent a good hour and a half explaining to a group of girls that you can't divide anything by 0. It was frustrating to watch them try to argue that you can divide 7 calculators into groups of 0. My teacher just couldn't comprehend the people he had to deal with. This is a classmate of mine. During English, he asked if she had to spell her name in English. I live in Belgium. During biology, we watched a documentary about the ocean. When a manta appeared, she said, "Look, that bird can dive." She said that she's a vegetarian because she only eats meat she likes. When talking about climate change, she was saying that our class is full of horrible people because we don't do that much for the climate. When we asked her what she does for the climate, she said she doesn't do anything for the climate because other people need to do that. She thinks she's the smartest girl in class. I'm an English teacher and coach of the boys cross-country team at my school. One of my runners showed up to a meet wearing a suit and tie, as well as slacks, even though I specifically told all the runners to wear their singlets and race shoes not only the day before, but in an email earlier that morning and right before they all got on the buses. I said, "Last call. If anyone needs to get their singlets and race shoes, go grab them now." Kids sometimes. Not a teacher, but a girl in my college bio class asked, if a woman doesn't have a uterus, how does she go to the bathroom? I am a teacher now, but this happened when I was in medical school. The only way we would ever be let off from attending something mandatory was if we had a sick leave from our hospital. So naturally students got really good at lying about having diarrhea and migraines. But if you had too many of the same complaints, the system would flag it and you'd have to complete a lengthier evaluation and your parents' guardians would be notified. So one kid had the idea of faking appendicitis. He faked all the signs and symptoms so well. He was after all a medical student. They almost took him to surgery. I teach in a district where kids get iPads in middle school and laptops when they get to the high school. They don't know how to do anything on a computer. Cut and paste, print, tab. It's crazy what they never learned. I taught human anatomy labs in college. We had 3 different practicals throughout the semester, and every test we would put a couple of really easy questions, or at least as easy as we could, so that there was a slight mental break and a confidence boost. The last practical we did included the digestive, circulatory, and urogenital system. The structure that was used was the male model with a pointer stuck right in the middle of the shaft of the D. The student missed it by answering that it was the urinary bladder. The student was male. I teach intro Geology. I gave a lab quiz on the density and buoyancy lab we had done the week before. One of the questions asked how are we able to build ships out of steel, considering that we measured steel to be more dense than water the week before. Almost the entire class gave variance of the ocean is so big compared to a boat that all the water is able to keep the boat afloat. As an answer, I get some version of this answer every semester, but it really struck me because so many of them put it, and they weren't just copying each other. This school happens to be right next to a bay, so I took a large, uninteresting rock from the prep room and marched the students outside to the bay. I said this rock is about 8 kilos and has a density of about 2.4 GCC, but, according to your last test responses, the bay is so big that it should float. I threw the rock into the bay and we all patiently waited for it to bob back up to the surface. University course. Paper on witches. Spelt witch throughout the whole paper. Favorite sentence. Witches and broomsticks. Footnoted a phone number as a source. Marking those papers broke me. I teach computer science. At GCSE level students have to learn 4 data types. Integer, whole numbers, real, decimal numbers, Boolean, true or false, and string, a collection of characters. We had done 4 lessons on this because some of the group are a little less able. First thing, lesson 5, I ask a student who we shall call Ad to name the data type we would use for the number 47. Correct answer integer. Acceptable answer with explanation, real. Ad answers B. Puzzled, I ask another student the same question. Integer, he replies. I go back to Ad for the answer and he replies, B. I write integer on the whiteboard in 8-inch higher letters. Point to it and ask the question again. Ad replies, B. I explain to him that the number 47 is a whole number and all whole numbers can be stored as type integer. I ask what data type we would use for the number 47 and he replies integer. Brilliant. I ask what data type we would use for the number 48 and the little darling replies, B. By now the whole group was in tears, so we moved on. 1 year later he still can't not identify even the simplest of data types. I'm a student and in my physics the teacher was explaining how space is a big vacuum and one student was super confused, and after asking some questions it eventually became clear he was thinking of a vacuum cleaner. Spent 15 minutes with my 9th graders going over MLA headings in great detail. Even gave them a reference sheet to keep at home. Later received at least 3 essays from students named your name. Truly sad times. Not me, but when my wife and I took a Lamaze class for the birth of our first child, there was a couple in the class that had no clues. This was in the late 80s, so no cell phones. The mother-to-be went into labor early. She was able to get a hold of her husband at work to let him know. He asked how far apart the contractions were, to which she replied to, well, the instructor had said to wait until they were 4 minutes before going to the hospital, so to call him back when they got there. Needless to say, things didn't go as planned. I have more how am I so dumb when I teach. Not a teacher but in AP English the girl I was partnered for writing assignments with not only still used a silent in essays, but a silent to us and any variation thereof. Her writing style and grammar matched that of a 2nd grader, and I had to mark up her papers just so that I could read them at all. She got furious with me each time our sitter faced her work. Drafts only the 2 of us would actually see, and when I asked her about her spelling she said her computer didn't have spell check. The year before that, the teacher messed with my honors English class to get us to question and debate things. He successfully convinced at least 16 people that the Apollo 11 moon landing was faked, with one girl reduced to tears because her lying aunt worked for NASA. He debriefed us every time he did it, but the same people fell for his claims every time. That was also the class where a DVD froze and one girl asked about 30 seconds later, how are they standing so still? I teach college in the UK, so 16-18 year olds. Mainly teach maths resets, so they've failed before but no excuse. Group of them having an argument. I go over and ask what's wrong. Majority of them trying to tell one student that you get 10 marks on every exam just for writing your name and ID number on the front. The one only disagreed because he said last time got less than that on the exam, marks just for correctly filling out your name. For Women's History Month, I had my students give presentations on famous women in history. One student got up and, dead serious, gave a presentation on Anne Franklin and said that the Holocaust was a guy called Hitler. She had researched all of this. I still don't understand. I was talking about CFL light bulbs and the fact that they contain mercury. One high school freshman raised his hand and asked if they had to go to Mercury to get it. When one of those little its ate sulfur in my class just for laughs. Oh wait, that was me. Not a teacher, but a girl I knew in school thought Pontius Pilate was one of the guys that did 9/11. Someone needs to share the link to the post about Kevin. During a unit on Vietnam, I was discussing the number of bombs dropped by the US and a student asked me if all those bombs are what killed the dinosaurs. Had another student ask if Pearl Harbor was still alive after doing a mini lesson on it last December. She thought it was a woman's name. I have a lot more, but those are my two most recent, egregiously dumb ones. I'm not a teacher, but was a high school student. I was in a baking class when I smelled blueberries. I thought we were making blueberry pies. Nope. The guy sitting next to me was vaping. He wasn't being discreet about it, either. Looking back at it, I can't help but laugh at how stupid it was. Not a teacher, a student. But during a 9th grade lesson on evolution, one of the girls claimed that they didn't believe in evolution and dinosaurs never existed. She said the world was 2017 years old. This was in 2017. Not my story, but my brother's. I still chuckle about it. He taught at a trade school, and he's a super nice, patient guy. One of his students calls in him in a panic that she can't get to school BC of a flat tire. She's frantic and has no one else to call for help. NP. This will be a good teaching moment. So he drives out to help her, and as he's examining the tire, explains to her that she's got a nail right in the top, and is going to show her how to change it. He scoffs at him, rolls her eyes, and proceeds to tell him that that's absolutely impossible. BC, the tire is flat on the bottom, not the top where the nail is. Needless to say, my brother didn't even bother explaining to her how to change the tire. Not a teacher, but I was surprised when a classmate didn't know what continent we lived on in 7th grade. College teacher here. One of my students who was finishing up writing their thesis emailed me saying, "They just told me I haven't finished all my courses yet, so I can't graduate." He honestly was mad at the guy who noticed the 8 courses he hadn't finished yet, like it was the guy's fault for not handing in his assignments. How are you blaming the people WHO told you, and why haven't you checked your study progress in the last 3 years? Edit. Can equals can't. One of my seniors had to solve a single variable equation. Isolate a variable. I tried walking him through it and asked what the opposite of subtraction was. He looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Division." About 5 chapters into To Kill a Mockingbird, a student asked me, "Who is this scout kid?" Again, TKAM gives me a lot of these moments from the kids who don't bother reading. For example, I have a quiz in which there's the following question: who is Tim Johnson? And the answer is a neighborhood dog that gets rabies, and Atticus Finch kills him. Occasionally I'll get, he's Scout's dad or he's a family friend of the Finches. Not a teacher, but once my classmate didn't remember the difference between proper and common nouns. He repeatedly said the word pen was a proper noun, like 10 times, and then he said it was an improper noun. Another time, the same kid basically spelled pencil as pencil. Well, it's Spanish equivalent. We're in Latin America. Did I mention we were well into the final years of high school, and that this is it you learn in the 1st grade of elementary school over here? I teach high school. During a lab I told my students to use string for something and I told them to tie the string in a knot. They legit responded, "We aren't Boy Scouts. We can tie knots." Too many to count really. One time a high school senior asked me when color was invented. When I seemed confused and said color wasn't invented, then she asked why old movies were in black and white if color already existed. Almost every year, someone makes a reference to slavery still existing during the Harlem Renaissance or the CRM. Another student asked me to point out our city on the map. She could find the state but had no idea where the city was located even though we are on a major river. Whenever students label a map and put DC in Washington state, I could go on and on. Not a teacher, but whenever the topic of 9/11 comes up, there is always one person who asks, didn't that happen in 2011?